Well, aloha, friends, and welcome to part 14 of our Exodus series. This one's called in an homage to the great Tom Petty. The waiting is the hardest part. And it is primarily concerned with the long observed capacity for the human heart to be an idol factory. And maybe more primarily, this teaching is concerned with the reality that it is our impatience that is the birthplace of idolatry. And idolatry, just so we have like a working definition, is just anything that takes us off course from resting in what is the most true about all of us, which is that we are living beings, that we are indwelled with the presence of our Creator. But what an idol is when something is taken, something that isn't actually primary to the truth of who we are, has taken precedence in our awareness and has kind of taken us captive or carried us away from reality. And so before we get to the key text, I want to share a little parable that I heard not too long ago. This one's called the parable of the master and his carriage. Master rides in his carriage, a faithful servant at the reins. The horses are strong, the roads are familiar. After a while, the master grows weary, falls asleep. The servant, proud of his skill, keeps driving, mile after mile, until enough time passes without the master's input that the servant begins to imagine that the carriage belongs to him. So he just steers wherever his impulse leads. Finally, the master awakens, and when he does, he asks, "Where are we?" And the servant can't answer. He's too busy navigating the winding roads at breakneck speeds. The carriage is still moving, dangerously fast even, but it has completely forgotten its destination. The mystics say that this is exactly what happens when the ego drives and the soul is still asleep. The servant, our functional mind, takes the reins and after a while forgets all about the sleeping master that it's meant to serve. The journey moves right along, just without a center, without a clear idea of destination, without the felt sense of safety, with too much responsibility on an underqualified servant. So when we circle back into our Exodus story, Moses is atop Mount Sinai and the Israelites are below the mountain. And they're observing a firestorm of divine presence, and they have no idea what's happening to Moses up there. And they don't have a clue when or if he'll be coming back down, and also they don't know who to expect to come back down the mountain, if he ever were to. And so they become restless. And in their restlessness, we read, when the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, and that how long it's taking is this Hebrew word bosh. It's translated as delay in most of our English texts. What it literally translates to is ashamed. It means to feel disrespected for having been made to wait. When the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered together and went to Aaron, and they said, "Make for us gods who will lead us. As for Moses, the man who led us out of slavery, we have no idea what's become of him." Mind you, this is like 20 days of time. So Aaron said, "Take the gold rings from the ears of your wives and sons and daughters. Bring them to me." All the people took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then Aaron took the gold, he melted it down, he molded it into the shape of a calf. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So, impatience is actually the birthplace of idolatry. When the divine seems to be delayed, which is almost always the case, is it not? the ego rushes to fill in the space, the emptiness, with something that it can manage. In this case, what seems manageable is a golden calf to worship. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering right now, yeah, I get it, I get the concept, but like, why a calf? In captivity in Egypt, the Israelites would have been familiar with the worship of the Egyptian bull god, whose name I believe is Apis. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And the bull god was a symbol of strength, vitality, virility, security, power. Everything that the Israelites had come to believe they lacked as a people. But it seems like maybe they're a little intimidated to go all the way and make an idol into the shape of a bull. That might have seemed a bit too powerful, and so they went with a calf. I don't know, this is what scholars think. A more bite-size, something that can manage if things got too out of hand. It's not a full commitment. Do you not also do this? I always grew up thinking, how silly is that, until I had enough life experience to come to the realization that we all do it. We all do it all the time. We don't do it with our melted earrings, but we do it with our career, our family, our reputation, our theology, our ideas about ourselves, our churches, our organizations, our fill in the blank. So when the divine seems delayed, what we experience, some part of us, is fear. And that part doesn't want to admit to the feeling of fear. It wants to keep masquerading as one who fears nothing. And so the ego, the mind, rushes to fill the empty space with something manageable. Well, really just rushes in general. There are few things that frighten the ego more than the thought of just like slowing down. I mean, just look around. Everybody's busy. Years ago I stopped commenting on my own busyness because I would watch people's eyes glaze over as I described my busyness, and at first I thought, oh, nobody gets it, and then I realized, oh no, it's just that everybody feels this way. So we don't really need to broadcast that feeling to each other. We're all busy. The world is spinning at an incredible rate. We're rushing from thing to thing, carrying around this deep sense of fatigue. We're afraid to look into the fatigue compartment, realizing that if we open up that Pandora's box, it may very well collapse us to a point of, actually needing to slow down. I remember a couple summers ago, my family and I went to go visit Chicago, where I grew up, and we were up on top of the Willis Tower, used to be the Sears Tower, and we were looking down at all the citizens of Chicago rushing around, and I remember my son saying to me, I remembered it because I remembered saying the same thing to my dad when I was a kid, that the people look like ants. But my son went a step further and he said, not only do they look like ants, they're acting exactly like the ants in my friend's ant farm that I've observed. Rushing around in all directions, convinced that whatever task it is that we're out to accomplish is meaningful and purposeful and has to be done now and has to be done quickly and also has to be done perfectly. And it is exhausting. And even when we feel the exhaustion tugging at us, even when we're on the brink of collapse and the ego mind knows it needs to recalibrate, even when the ego concedes and says, fine, let's pick up a mindfulness practice, let's get an app that'll teach us how to sit quietly and do nothing. Well, then the restlessness also recalibrates and starts to wonder about when's the payoff for all of this doing nothing stuff, because honestly we got a lot to do and I can't tell if this is getting us anywhere. Here is one of my favorite writers, Martin Laird. He said, most people don't stick with a contemplative discipline for very long at all. We've heard all sorts of talk about contemplation delivering inner peace, but when we turn within to seek this peace, we meet inner chaos instead. The peace will indeed come, but it will be the fruit not of pushing away distractions, but of meeting thoughts and feelings with stillness instead of commentary. This is the skill that we must learn. The reason that developing this skill requires so much patience is that our awareness is so freighted with thinking. Whenever we turn within, we meet chatter, thinking, and commenting. In consequence, while we're aware of spiritual longing, we perceive ourselves as cut off from the deeper ground of our being, where the silence of the word is forever emptying itself into being. The simple, spacious immersion in God gets refracted as the search for God as object to be acquired. The ego protects itself with chatter and acquisition schemes. It tells us that doing nothing is irresponsible. It equates emptiness and even stillness for some kind of a failure. It's addicted to content. It does whatever it can to distract us from silence, because silence reveals how very little control we actually have over anything at all. And we don't like to think about that very much. And so the ego delays the surrender into this recognition. But what we don't realize for some time is that by suppressing this recognition, we also avoid the peace that only comes through surrender, through stillness, through silence. The peace that comes when we recognize finally that the silence that we fear is actually the voice of God. As Thomas Keating wrote, God's first language is silence. Everything else is just a sloppy translation. And so our mind is cluttered with sloppy translation that makes it difficult to recognize that we don't really need most, if not all, of the things that we convince ourselves we have to chase after, that what we have is already enough, probably too much, that what we need is always right here, right now, and that there is no salvation or enlightenment or God as object to attain to or acquire. There's hardly anything that we actually need to do, and that is the essence of grace and the central message of the gospel. Here's Laird again. The psychological self is a construct pasted up out of thoughts and feelings. Well, that's a terrifying thing to realize about your sense of self. And so for a while we prefer the chatter and the distraction for fear that we'll discover, that the emperor has no clothes. But wouldn't you rather know? Aren't you curious about whatever it was that St. Paul meant when he said, the truth of who you are, your true self, is hidden with Christ in God. But as long as we're afraid to slow down and to sink into the silence that can't offer an answer for that, there is no answer for who our true self is. Not even the Bible tries to take a crack at it. It leaves it in mystery. But if we're uncomfortable with mystery and we're uncomfortable with silence, then we just keep our attention riveted to the chatter. It's a little bit like a stage actor who finally got cast in his dream role. And as the production is coming to a close, he just chooses to, improvise, continue to generate lines and ideas, anything to keep the show from ending. Anything to avoid having to admit that, just like the driver in our little carriage parable, we actually have no idea what we're doing. Now, that same restlessness that drives the individual ego also drives the collective one. And every culture has a shared ego, a shared sense of fear, purpose, and identity. Our systems, our governments, religions, cultural stories, structures, economies, they're not separate from us. They are an extension of us. They are a giant mirror. And so the more we gripe about how our culture is acting this way and that way, we can fixate on the things that we can't change, the things that are too big and too far out seeming to ever even really address. We can waste our time in conversations like that, or we can say, what is this mirroring in me, and why am I so uncomfortable about that I would rather scapegoat, this politician or that church pastor. All that stuff is just our collective ego made visible. It's the mirror of our inner condition. The writer Eckhart Tolle has pointed out that the only thing more dangerous than the individual ego is the collective one. Because when we band together as a collective ego, we just amplify the restlessness and the noise and the distraction. We amplify our shared fear of silence and space, and then we build entire empires and cultures and civilizations almost entirely as an excuse to avoid confronting the thing that we're afraid of, ourself. Just like our individual ego, our economies equate movement with survival. We're conditioned to believe that if they stop, even briefly, they're on the verge of becoming extinct. So when markets shake or growth seems to slow, we tremble. The old business adage, if you're not growing, you're dying. Does anything sound more exhausting than that? Especially if we believe that the growth is dependent on our effort. My God, what a recipe for burnout. As though our shared worth, our value, our intrinsic value as living beings is somehow conditional on our ability to maximize output. And that's why during times of crisis, we hardly ever choose stillness. Instead of resting, we stimulate. Rather than listening, we produce solutions. Instead of surrendering, we sacrifice our sanity to rescue the machines that we ourselves built. In what I'm pretty sure is a big, long joke that the Bible tells in the book of Isaiah, the 44th chapter. We read this. The ironsmith fashions an idol with a tool, works it over the coals, shapes it with hammers, and forges it with his strong arm. All this work makes him hungry, and his strength fails. He drinks no water because of his determination, and soon he grows faint. The carpenter stretches a line, marks it out with a stylus, shapes it with planes, marks it with compasses. He makes it in human form, with human beauty, to be set up in a shrine somewhere. He cuts down cedars, or perhaps takes a cypress or an oak. He burns through resources. Half of it he burns in the fire, and with half he roasts his meat, he eats, and he's satisfied. He warms himself, and he says, I'm warm. I can feel the fire. But the rest of it, he makes it into a god, his idol. He bows down to it, he worships it, he prays to it, and he says, save me, for you are my God. Those who do this don't know. They don't comprehend, for their eyes are shut, so they cannot see. Their minds cannot understand. They feed on ashes. A deluded heart has led them astray, and they cannot say, is not this thing I now worship the same thing that I myself created? Through the eyes of awakened consciousness, this all looks so absurd. But while the soul still sleeps, what is actually absurd feels somehow necessary or critical. Even when we can see that it's silly, we still say to ourselves, yeah, but somebody's got to do it. We feed half of our energy to survival, and with whatever remains, we craft together imaginary things who promise to offer some kind of mastery over things that we can never actually understand. Every idol that we've ever built ancient or modern, is the product of the ego's attempt to avoid having to wait in the dark, to surrender, to learn how it feels from the inside to live without so much urgency, need, perceived lack. Silence teaches us to wait and finally reveals that there's nothing to wait for. You're already it. So the contemplative task is not to condemn the world's busyness, chaos, speed, but to take a break from it, to find pockets of space where we can be rehabilitated from the tyranny of the urgent. There's Thomas Merton. Let there always be quiet, dark places, somewhere that your mind can be idle and forget its concerns and descend, finally, into silence. When Moses descends, finally, from the mountaintop and discovers the Israelites dancing wildly around their golden calf, he gets so angry, he breaks the stone tablets that he carried down with him. And this wasn't an act of rage, it's one of revelation. See, the external forms have to shatter before the truth can emerge, before, as Jeremiah said, at one point you had some laws written that you felt you needed to obey. And they carried you along for a while until the truth of the law, which is love, you discovered, is written in the human heart. The external forms have to crack, they have to shatter, they have to fall away, so the truth of being can finally emerge. Contemplation performs the same function. The idols of thought, the idols of busyness, the idols of certainty, the idol of our felt sense of self break away in the ruthless, loving gaze of God, until all that's left of us is simply presence. When the servant finally remembers the master, the carriage wheels don't fall off. The story isn't over. The show goes on, just with less urgency, with less erratic behavior, with less panic and fear at the reins. Like the old saying goes, the mind is a wonderful tool, but a terrible master. The master is the soul that sleeps within us, just like Jesus in the ship, as all the disciples panicked and worried about what would become of them at the storm in the sea. Remember the sleeping master? He didn't wake up in time. He didn't give them a warning that there's a storm coming. He's just sound asleep in the boat. And right when the darn thing is about to capsize, he wakes up and he says to the waves, calm down, and they do. That same presence lives within us. And I don't know how to wake it up. I wish I could give you the shortcut or the secret. But it does seem to be the storms in this life, the ones that are just too much for us to handle, that eventually break us open and break us down to a point of finally asking for help in a way that is sincere. In Exodus 25:8, we read, God saying to Moses, "Make for me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among you." The sanctuary is itself space. The very thing some part of us is most afraid to surrender into is the exact place where the presence of God dwells. Psalm 48, within your temple, O God, we meditate on your unfailing love. Within your temple, we contemplate your unending love. And a couple thousand years later, St. Paul added, Do you realize that it is your body that's a temple where the Holy Spirit lives? The Spirit is in you, and it is a gift from God. You are no longer your own. Oh my God, what tremendous freedom to no longer be your own. So, I guess this week, if you're going to do something, rather than running from the fear, ignoring the things that you're afraid of, because when you're running away, you're effectively letting something else steer the course of your life. Because you're not just running away from something, you're running towards other things. And it takes some courage to say, is it all worth it? Do I even have the energy for this anymore? So rather than running from the things we're afraid of, I don't know. Maybe we can take a little cue from this cat here and just find a table somewhere to rest on, maybe near a person that you trust. Take an honest look within. And don't look away until you see the face of Christ reflected back to you. Grace and peace. Till next time.